Hi guys, thanks for joining me for another video. Today we're going to look at three landscapes that I shot whilst on a recent holiday. It was all shot one evening just down at the beach, and I went down there just on a whim. Didn't know what the conditions were going to be quite like, but I thought it would be an ideal opportunity just to get some shots with this, which is, as some of you may well know, a neutral density filter. It's basically sunglasses for your camera. So what that enables you to be able to do is basically have your shutter open for a long period of time and capture movement in whatever you're shooting. And so as long as you're locked down on a tripod, the things that are supposed to stay still, and the things that are moving are captured as more of a fluid way. So clouds, for instance, which is the main thing on these shots, actually start to move through the sky and give a more soft kind of look to the picture. So that's what I've done in these ones, and I'm going to just walk you through three examples. They're very similar, but basically where we're going to do a little bit of enhancement through the global side of things, exposure, highlights, shadows, bit of split toning, that sort of thing. And we're also going to take the images a little bit further with radial filters and also gradient filters, which are two really handy tools just to take your imagery to the next level and help to guide your viewer's eye exactly where you want it, and also make local adjustments if you need one bit brighter or whatever. But you'll see. So let me show you the three images that we're going to be working with. There'll be this one looking down the beach and how that became this. We're going to take a quick look at this image here where we've got some nice movement in the clouds at the top right, and show you how that becomes this one here. I'm just giving a bit more vibrancy and punch to each of these images. Simple stuff in Lightroom, and I'm just going to walk you through how I do it. Here I found some nice old beams on the beach which possibly were part of an old pier, and how I've taken that image and processed it with a little bit of just enhancement of that sunset to give us this. So bear with me and let's take a wee look at what we've done. So let's start with image number one here. Just to let you know how these were shot, I was looking at long exposures of around 20 to 30 seconds. It was evening time. I was already at f11, ISO 100. How do I increase shutter speed to be 20 seconds long? I've used a 10 stop neutral density filter, so I've literally put sunglasses, well, not literally, but it's like putting sunglasses over your lens, so that just increases the length of time that the shutter has to be open, and you get this beautiful movement in the clouds, which just gives a really nice soft look, which I thought accentuated these nice pastel colors and just gave a really nice soft feel to the image. So anyway, we want to get that image looking something more like this. That was the direction I took it. So let's kind of see what we can do here. The first thing that I'd want to do with this is actually get rid of some of the movement of the seagulls that you can see here. They've just been pottering around on the beach, and obviously that's a little distracting, so I'm just going to get my healing brush tool and draw over them and choose a section of the picture that I'd like to replace that with. I'm not going to be too fussy with that. We've also got a couple of seagulls over here. Do you know what? I'll leave this one to the left and just get rid of this ghost one there. That's a little bit of a too flat replacement, not enough texture that's similar to what's around it. Normally if you go left or right on a landscape, you'll find a bit of texture that matches. You just want to line it up so that carries through, and using the healing brush tool, it will actually emulate the tones and colors around that section, whereas if you actually just straight out clone it like I've clicked here, it's not quite as good result in my opinion. So let's dive right into the global adjustments here. So first thing I want to do is just have a little play around with the white balance, and I think just warming up slightly and also just bringing in a little more magenta, something like that would be nice. Now the exposure, I'm happy with that. Maybe brighten it just a tint there and bring the contrast up in the image. Sometimes what I like to do with the sliders is actually get a little bit aggressive with them and slide them left and right and really get a feel for what's going on with the adjustment. So for example, if I grab the shadow slider here and bump that up, we start to see that it's really bringing out the detail in the sand dunes and that there, like particularly around the trees and stuff. So we might want to see a little more of that, but we don't want to push it too far, because as you can see, we've got a bit of a strange magenta color cast going on in these areas here and here. I'm just going to give us a little more screen real estate. We don't need that over there. So in fact, let's lose that as well, and we can really see what we're doing here. Okay, the highlights, I'm not going to play around with them too much, maybe bring them down a tad, bring the whites up. As you can see on the histogram here, we haven't really got any whites, but if you think about this particular image, there is nothing in the image that should be white. So if we bring it up, we're going to start to blow out the clouds there, which isn't really the look we want, but I may bring it up just a little bit just to increase that dynamic range. And our blacks, we can bring those down slightly, and we're starting to take shape here, and I really feel that this beautiful vibrant color image deserves the vibrancy to be popped a wee bit. We don't want to go crazy and make it a nutty rainbow thing. We just want to add a little bit more, so maybe around, I don't know, 37 or something like that. The next thing that I'm going to be doing with this is actually starting to do some local adjustments. I really feel that that's where my images, or your images as well, can start to step up to another level. I feel like the sky, at the top of the sky, is just too bright, and rather than trying to deal to that with the highlight slider, a much better way to do that is actually with either a graduated filter by pulling over something that's going to darken it, something like that, or a radial filter. If you've kind of got like an arc shape like this, we can just grab a radial filter, kind of put it in the middle and draw an ellipse out that's going to kind of fill that shape roughly, which is what I've done there. Don't need to darken it that much. The colours in this one are a little bit funky, to be honest. There's this weird magenta in this cloud here, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to just use another radial filter. Just pull one out here, move it over the top, double click on that, and that will neutralize that. It's more in the color. So what we can do, we can see that it's quite magenta at the moment, so we can actually grab the magenta slider and just see if we can't kind of take some of that magenta out, and even by bringing in a little bit of the yellow there, we can start to make what was quite magenta. We can use the opposite side of the color wheel just to try and reduce that cast. I'm also just going to feather that in a little bit. That just helped to make it look a little more realistic, to feather it, and perhaps brighten it a little bit, just a tad. Yeah, I like that. I'm also going to brighten the horizon line here as well, coming through here. I just feel that that needs to be a little brighter. We don't want it to go too bright, particularly not in the foreground there. I just felt like that was a little too dark there, but by brightening what was a quite dark area, which was very blue, we've now got like a light blue area, which doesn't seem to work very well. So I'm just going to see if I can play with the colors there just to harmonize that and give us that more of a orangey pinky tone. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Now one thing I would like to do is, I just feel that the cloud area here doesn't really have too much interest in our photo. It looks a little flat, so I'm going to see if I can't use the clarity slider on this local radial adjustment just to sort of bring out a little more detail in that cloud. As long as I keep it away from the sand dune there, I think we can push that all the way to 100 and just drop it in there. So if I get rid of that and then pop it back, yeah, it's just giving those clouds just a little bit more punch. I might even just try and, if you bring the contrast up, you usually increase the saturation as well, but you can counteract that just by dialing that saturation back to where it would have been beforehand. Yeah, I'm happy with that. One thing I should have mentioned that's always good to do before you actually start an image, better late than never, but if you come down to your camera calibration here, I'll just hide that, you can choose your profile, and personally I have this is my shot on my D800. I will go for direct sun for this one. It's close enough. Now straight away we've seen the color shift. This would actually be more accurate to what the color should be initially when you set the correct profile, but I've done this a little bit back to front. But do you know what we're going to do? We're going to now just come into the color palette here. Sorry, I'm saying color palette. Come into this color section, and we're just going to make a couple of changes. Let's bring down the orange, or shift the hue of the orange. Yeah, I'm liking that. See, if we again throw this around, we can see that the orange slider is definitely talking to that cloud there, and it was a little too yellowy. So I'm just going to bring some of that yellow out and just shift that more towards a kind of pinky reddy hue. I quite like that. And if we come down to the magenta, where we had a little bit of magenta in that cloud, I assume because nothing's changing as I move that slider, that means that that radial filter we put over here has pretty much neutralized that magenta. Hasn't got rid of it entirely, but it certainly doesn't stand out as much anymore. Sharpening, I'm not too worried about. I might increase it just slightly. Noise reduction, and I'm just going to bring that up slightly, just so we have a nice smooth image, which will tie in nicely with the smooth effect of the clouds. Looking good. Lens correction, remove the chromatic aberration, yes please. Profile correction, let's see, before and after, doesn't really do too much. Removes a bit of the natural vignetting of the lens, but you know what, I quite like that. I like it a bit darker in the corners, brings your eye to the center of the frame. Very nice, very nice. Effects, don't need to worry about anything with the effects. One thing I would like to do is just have a little play with the split toning here. I often like to add a little bit of orange to the highlights and a little bit of blue to the shadows, and now we can really get a nice unique kind of look here. Using Lightroom's built-in color tabs up the top can often be a good starting place, and then you can kind of just tweak it to your own personal preference. And when you've done that, by using the balance, you can kind of shift how much of those tones you want, whether it's influencing more the highlights or the shadows. Somewhere about there is what I'm liking. So I'm going to say that's my first image pretty much done. It's not exactly the same as what I did originally, but that's the joy of doing this sort of thing. It's not an exact science, it's kind of sliders to taste. Let's move on to our next one here. Let's have a look what we are going to do here. A good thing to do when you're actually starting on an image is kind of have an idea of the direction you want to go. I mean, I've pre-processed this image here, so you can kind of see what I'm wanting to achieve. One of the things is bring out a little more detail and clarity in all of the houses and holiday homes over here, and just give it a bit more saturation. Also the sun bleeding out from behind here is a little more evident than the kind of washed out version here. So that's kind of what we're going for, and let's see how we can achieve that. It's going to be done in a similar way using global contrast adjustments, which are all done here in this right hand panel, but also using the useful tool of radial filters and graduated filters as well. So let's actually start with our graduated filters and radial filters this time. I often like for landscape images to create a bit of a light sandwich. What I mean by that is making the skies darker from the top and bringing down the exposure through there, and that'd be akin to actually in camera using
a graduated neutral density filter. And once that filter's over there, you can play around with that and just kind of get a look that you might like. You might want to increase the contrast just on that, just to bring that out a little bit more, interest in those clouds. I'm just having a little play around here, see what we can do. Yep, happy with that. By the same token, this area down here may be looking a little too dark, so let's actually increase the light down there just a little bit, maybe in the shadows. Yep. Now, one thing I don't want to do is just blow out these highlights through here. So if I put a little radial filter through here, it starts, because it's dropping the exposure, it looks a little strange at the moment, but what I'll do is feather it out so you can barely notice it towards the edges, but it's definitely serving a purpose around this area here and not letting that highlight get too blown out. We can bring the highlights down. I prefer, if I'm trying to control those highlights, I definitely want to use this slider rather than the whites, because if I use whites, actually, can you see it creates this muddying, just a greying effect, and that's just because it's bringing down the actual white point, the pure white point, and we don't want to send our whites grey. We just want to reduce their intensity. So happy with that. May even do the same thing along this horizon line here under the cloud. So if I just duplicate that and drop that in there, happy days. Happy days. Okay, let's make this a little warmer. Let's warm up this area and this area. Let's just, yeah, that's nice. Look, grab the temperature, crank that bad boy all the way up. Let's give it a little more magenta in that area as well. Now I'm quite liking that. Let's do something similar here. Let's just give it a little more warmth. Nice, nice. The next thing we want to do is actually just bring out some of this detail and also brighten up this area here. So if I draw a nice big draw a big blah 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 over that and just start to brighten it. If we just do a generic brightening, it's going to brighten everything around there, and that's where luminosity masks are our friends. So we can come in and select luminance, and in the range here, if we clip the blacks, you can see that that mask, the exposure adjustment we made is not affecting the blacks, but if we come the other way, it's not affecting the whites. So we can bring that down so we protect the highlights in the sky. And basically it's saying between black and middle grey, that luminance range, we are now able just to brighten that. I don't think it's a precise or perfect masking method by any means, but it does a good enough job. We can also increase our clarity in there. Look at those houses pop all of a sudden. Nice. Don't want to take it too crazy, but I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so I mean, we don't need to do too much more on this. I mean, I think one of the things we can do, if I go into solo mode, so we only see one panel at a time, let's have a little play around and see what we can do. But first things we can do is just make sure we're happy with the color balance. I might increase the temperature and perhaps the magenta, bring that up a little bit. Let's pop the contrast up here, and now I'm going to follow my basic kind of D curve that I often do, which is dropping down highlights, bringing up shadows and whites, and bringing down blacks. I will often create that kind of D shape through highlights, shadows, whites and blacks in a lot of my images. Works very nicely for Nikon files, NEF files, and I know that holds true right from my early Nikon D870 right through to D850 that I've used recently, perfectly well, and around those sort of numbers is good as well. I mean, obviously you can tweak that slightly depending on what you want to achieve, but that general down in the highlights, down in the blacks, up shadows, up whites tends to work well. Canon users, do me a favor, let me know if that kind of format works for your files as well. It'd be interesting to know that. Interested. Okay, moving on. Let's put a little bit of clarity in there, and let's also bump up the vibrance a little bit. Wow, we're starting to look really rich and bright now, aren't we? So if we compare that with our original edit, we're a little darker in this one that I'm doing at the moment, but I quite like it. What I may do is just actually bring up some brightness through this particular area here, and then feather it out. So if I brighten it, protect the highlights just a tad, bring them down, and then feather that bad boy so it looks a little more natural. So we've got like a little hotspot thing that we can just put where we want our focus. And because we originally brought down the highlights around this sun setting here, we now have the liberty to actually increase this whole area and brighten that without blowing this out. And that's looking quite nice now. Let's just do a couple more things. Maybe look at the split toning again. I think that always, well, not always, but can work quite nicely, particularly for landscape images. It just helps to unify the whole thing. So again, let's go for something like 37, maybe 47, 48. Let's do that. And saturation wise, 22 is fine. If you're hearing a little scratch in the background, a little that's actually my dog scratching at the door trying to get in and be with me, bless her. Okay, yeah, you don't want to push the split toning too far. Again, it's another one of those things that you could crank it right up if you want initially, just to see what is being affected and where. And when you get that kind of the color you want, that's when you can then bring it down into a much more subtle range. Yeah, and then if you want to see your before and after, just toggle your split toning switch, and I'm happy with that. So overall, that image is looking acceptable. It's not amazing, but it's a really quick way to work in Lightroom and get your images looking a whole heap better than the original. So if I press the / key to show us our before, that's our before, and again I'll hit / to show us our after. So we've got before, where we don't have much of a dynamic range going on there. Go after, and we've certainly increased the contrast, we've certainly increased the saturation, and I like that. If you finish your image and you just want to make some final tweaks, you can always come back in and grab hold of the temperature slider and think, do I want to warm it up? Do I want to cool it down? You can do all of those things after the fact. And sometimes what I think it pays to do is just step away from your work for a while, go and make a coffee, grab a drink, glass of water, whatever, come back, check it out, and sometimes you're either happy with what you've done or horrified at just how far you've pushed it. I'm thinking I may have pushed this one a little too much towards the realms of oversaturated. Let's see if we can, what we do if we go from black and white and just start to bring that slider back. We'll leave it where we had it, but you get the idea. You can come make some changes. Let's move on to our final image now. Again, this was shot using a neutral density filter, 10 stops, and that's allowed us to get a 30-second exposure. You can see all of that information here. I shot this with f8 ISO 200. We're using a wide angle 16 to 35mm lens. I believe I was around 35 for this one, and I've focused on, I believe, this plinth log, whatever, sticking up here. So when it renders, okay, it looks like it was actually this one here. So I wanted to get, again, I'm focusing about a third of the way into the scene distance wise. This log here is not particularly sharp, but it can pass. It's acceptably sharp. So without using focus stacking, which I did a tutorial on not too long ago, if you're just using one frame, then you want to make sure you're using hyperfocal distances for your focusing. I just did that guessing a third of the way into the scene. That's often what you can do for landscape stuff if you not being super precise about it all. Still gives you a good enough result. Anyway, while I was just chatting, I was just getting rid of using the heel brush, just clicking or painting over some of the anomalies in the sand that were just sort of distracting me a little bit. Maybe footprints from where people had been just before, little pockets of sand that have popped up, crazy little worm creatures coming up in the sand. Who knows? Anyway, get rid of all of those, and again, let's start by doing some graduated filters and radial filters. I want to make the sky darker, so I'm just going to grab that and bring it down. Look, we've just dropped the exposure. We can see how far do we want to push that. We can also use our Luminance Mask because we know that the sky is brighter than these logs here. So what we can do is actually just protect those logs by grabbing the dark end of that range and just bring it up slightly. I'm happy with that. Now, what I would love to do in this image is actually increase the clarity and texture in this wood here. If I grab the clarity slider and pump that right up, it does that to the wood, but it also makes the rest of the picture, in my opinion, look pretty gnarly and over processed. So we won't do that, but what we will use that kind of philosophy of its clarity that's given us that result. If I just drag a radial filter over one of these and reset the exposure, one of the first things I'm thinking we need to do is just brighten the log itself. Don't worry about the halo at the moment. I will fix that up shortly. I just want to see the effect it's doing on the wood at the moment. Grab the clarity, crank that up. Yeah, so as soon as we crank that up, it darkens, the blacks become really dark, like too black in my opinion. So we could also increase the shadows and bring the blacks up slightly. We're going to teeter this clarity back off a little bit. Again, I'm working heavy here, really heavy, to get the effect I want. Now I'm heading in the right direction, and then I can just gently bring those slider values back down to a point where it looks a little more natural. The next thing we can do to make it look more natural is actually feather the edges. So if we grab the feathering and bring that right up, we start to lose that halo. So even though our the area of our filter goes way over, because we've feathered it, it's not as noticeable. One other thing we could do is now grab the shift key and scale in, and that's going to keep the same ratio, and we can just make sure we bring it inside the wood itself. So if I move it outside, you can see what the wood looks like, and I bring it back in, and we start to get that texture in the wood. Let's do that again by duplicating it and bring it over to this one. And we can again just change the shape to match the wood. We don't need to be precise, but it's certainly helping our cause to bring out that detail and texture in that lovely wood. And I think visually that actually makes a really nice juxtaposition to the softness and sort of placid I'm a photographer, not an English major. Give me a break. But you know where I'm going with this. The clouds and everything, pastel colours just look soft, dreamy, and these bits of wood look rough and rugged, and a really nice contrast point to that. Okay, anyway, let's stop me going on about that because I don't know what I'm talking about. It's late here where I'm recording this. Everyone else is tucked up in bed, apart from my dog scratching on the door. So I just felt this was a little too dark in here. Let's bring the exposure up. It was also a little blue. If you see that bluey tinge sort of down there, I'll neutralize it, put it back to the middle, but it is still a bluey tinge. So I'm just going to bring up the temperature a little bit, feather it off again so it's more natural. And now we can start looking at some more global adjustments. So let's close up our dialog box there for working with that, and look at our temperature. I think for our temperature this time, let's kind of stick where we are at the moment, but just bring the magenta up just gives it a nice kind of pinky purple, some would say magenta look, just sort of heads it all in the right direction. Exposure wise, we don't really need to do too much with that. I think I'm happy with that. Now this image I think will look quite nice with a little bit of contrast brought into it, maybe around 18, that's nice. And excuse me, bring down the highlights. Yeah, that's nice. Push the shadows up. You know what we're doing here, we've done it already. Create our D, and we don't want to go too far with the whites because we don't want to blow those highlights out really. So just somewhere that it starts to give it a little more dynamicism. What about if we took it the other way? Do you know what, on this one I'm actually going to bring it down, bring the whites down, and the blacks, let's also bring that down so that they're touching. See on the histogram here, we want those blacks to kind of start touching the bottom there. What you can do is just click that triangle in the top left, and that'll actually give you warning. See the blue? That is showing me where I'm hitting pure black at the moment. But even though I'm only just hitting pure black around here, I think it's darkened the image far too much and brought in far too much contrast. So it's a good guide, but as long as your monitor is pretty accurate, it's always nice just to use your eye, I feel. And that's kind of where I want to send this for that one. Beyond that, again, split toning. We're doing the same thing to each image, just reinforcing that sort of thing. So let's grab the blue there, maybe a deeper blue. That's too saturated. Let's bring it back down, maybe somewhere around that. Oh, that warmth is quite nice actually. Let's bring the balance up there, but now I think the blues need to be a little richer, so I'll just bring that saturation back up. Now one thing that we haven't done yet is dealt with the curves. Let's just give this a little more contrast through our curve. So what you can do is you can either put a point on this curve itself, click and drag up and down. Up's going to make it brighter, down's going to make it darker. Or another option is click this little circle tool here, and then you can click anywhere on your picture, it'll select that tone on the curve, push up, it'll increase the brightness, pull down, it'll make it darker. But that's quite cool if we want to start using that to actually give us a little more control in our image and what we want brighter and darker. So I'm just going to have a little play around here. At the moment I've taken everything a bit darker, but let's bring some more of that contrast back in, something like that. But again, we don't want to blow out any of these highlights, so let's just pull those back down just at tints.
Well guys, I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, do me a favour, hit the like button, give me a thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to see more tutorials like this, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll be putting out videos like this much more regularly than I have been. So yeah, just stay tuned for more videos. If you've got ideas of things you'd like to learn from me, if you think I can help you develop your photography, post-production, Lightroom or Photoshop skills, again, leave me a note in the comment section and I'll take that on board, and you never know, the next video might be dedicated to helping you. So thanks ever so much again guys. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.